The Strange Motion Way podcast, brought to you by
Royal Purple. Premium synthetic motor oils and high-performance chemicals have been designed to improve performance, provide long-term protection, and give you the confidence to push your vehicle to the limit. Royal Purple Premium Synthetic Motor Oils. Tonight, we got another doozy. I say this every time, and Carrie's like, they're all awesome guests. A graduate of the Art Center of Design in Pasadena, California, he began his career at General Motors, then went on to Ford Motor Company, chief designer in Europe and North America, was part of the 2005 Mustang. We won't hold that against him for being a Mustang guy. He chaired the transportation department at the College for Creative Studies in Detroit from 2008 to 2011. I didn't know this till I found this on the Google today. Was design director at Rivian Automotive. Oh, and he designed a little custom car known as Cadzilla and the Illumacoop and other things for Boyd Coddington. He himself has built one of the craziest Chevy Roadsters with a blown pop vent engine. He had a pretty killer, I think it was chopped, 55 Buick. And he has one of the most beautiful land speed racing Model A Roadsters. Currently working on a traditional styled Model A Roadster pickup truck. He's in many Hall of Fames, including the Grand National Roadster Show Hall of Fame, the Starbird National Rod and Custom Car Hall of Fame, and I'm sure there's a few other things that I'm missing out. Tonight, the one, the only Larry Erickson.
Welcome.
Well,
hey, sending that one to my mom.
Yeah,
that was just awesome.
No, but somebody, do you have a Wikipedia page?
No, but my mom's not really up on that stuff, so she's she's my main PR person right now.
You should have a Wikipedia. Yeah.
There's so many people with serious depth of contributions. It just seems like it's just great to be able to talk about these people and having met them and worked with them, and like Winfield, Gene just passed away, and one of my favorite little Gene things is going to Walmart and talking to the folks in the produce department about what was fresh and what was not fresh.
Starbird a few times, and he does
all
the
these
same
connections
thing.
that have come over.
Find the fresh deli bread, and you talk. Yeah, you can't sneeze at guys. I kind of changed how I went grocery shopping after hanging out with Daryl Starbird for a couple of weeks. And when you're in your 90s, I think you have to listen to these guys.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, both of those guys have either built more cars or racked up more years or whatever you want to say. And they just are incredible sources of information.
Okay, so now we're going to rack your brain, and we're going to go back to growing up. We like to, how you got influenced in cars.
Oh,
and so little Larry, what sparked your interest as like, I'm going to be a career hot rod guy?
Okay, little Larry. Yeah, well, I always think these things either come from someone who's close to you or some moment that you just it just landed on you, And my dad was always into old cars, and more so than just old cars. He was into what he really thought were the right-looking cars, And so he had a 40 Mercury, he had a 40 Ford, he had 36 Ford, and he wasn't really a hands-on mechanic. I think he just liked the aesthetic and, the way things looked. And there's always been this debate about great cars, whether they're, a matter of the right people having opinions or if there's truly something about them that is outstanding. And he owned a gas station about 95 miles north of San Francisco. And he had a little car lot next to it. And we always had a used car, but we had a really cool used car, So my mom got to take us to school in a 60 Pontiac Bonneville convertible with a 421 and a 4-speed. And power steering, So I got exposed to those cars, and it kind of rubs off on you, but it also, I think even when you're little, you get a sense of what your parents and what people who are important to you think is important, what really has substance to it. And there was a guy by the name of Ed Bingley. He owned one of the few speed shops, or I guess it was speed shop, gas station, whatever, down in Hillsburg, California, which is, top of Sonoma County, about 20 miles away. And through him, my dad met Vern Tardell and Steve Castelli and folks like that from that area. And, my dad was just a regional guy, but he had all these buddies there into hot rods.
Our good mutual friend,
so that sinks in.
Cullen, we've had him on the podcast. He's from Santa Rosa. And one time we were there, usually he brought me out for a serious thrash for like a Roadster show or SEMA thrash, and we didn't have time. But one year we snuck away, went to a shop and I'd had lunch at Vern Tardell's place. And man, what a cool place he had.
Oh yeah. It's, there's some people that have just been doing this forever. It isn't a matter of sort of what came into vogue or seeing, ZZ Top on television or something like that. These folks were into old Fords before, and hot rodded old Fords, not just old Fords, and Vern is absolutely one of those guys. And, Northern California is fortunate because it doesn't salt its roads, it doesn't have a lot of snow. It's every 5 years, but everything survives, and it always amazed me. My dad would find some, 41 Buick or something like that in the middle of nowhere. And he bought me my first car, which was actually a pickup, but it was a 56 Ford big window custom cab with a 392 Imperial motor in it, and I think he paid all $500 for it.
And how old were you when you got that?
Old enough to know that it had really shitty brakes and probably would kill me if I just kept it very long. But no, I think I just got my driver's license, and my dad always used those kind of situations in life to do something that he probably wanted to do, because he probably wanted that 56 big window for himself. Because from the very beginning, 53 through 56 Fords, they were kind of the hot rodders pickup, even when they were barely new.
Ford trucks were probably one of my favorite Ford trucks ever. A 40 Ford truck's pretty good, but I love a 56, especially a big window.
Well, oh yeah, 40 Ford truck's a beautiful truck. 56 got a little bit more of a brute in it, but the hot rod guys took to it really quick, and there's some great examples of those things out there.
Your license, did you have a first job in high school? Did you have anything? So far, the majority is, of all the people we've been doing this for, we've recorded about 55 podcasts now, is they worked at a grocery store. That seems to be the
most common.
Common one.
Well, in typical style, my dad found me a job at a car lot, and it was a Ford dealer who had a satellite operation in our little town. And it was a height of the two fuel crises. So the first one that happened in like 73, and then another one happened in 74, right in there. But I was just basically washing cars, and I'd have to shuttle them back and forth to the other dealership, which was about 15 miles away. And everybody was trading in the serious muscle. I mean, we had cars in there that, that if you had a Barrett Jackson run, they'd really knock out some serious numbers, 375 horse, 327, 68 Chevelle with a rock crusher in it, 80 or 60, I think it's 68 or 69. No, it would have been 69 Roadrunner with a 383. Just a lot of cars traded in that people had just moved on and were worried about fuel economy and things like that, and had no resale value, So lots of good iron. I think I had 20 some cars before I moved out of my mom's house and my parents' house, I should say. And all
When
of
I
them
was
sat in their driveway for at least
19,
6 months,
at the time when I was
So all
19, I
kinds of
don't know if I've ever said
iron.
this on one of these podcasts yet. I owned 11 cars, not bought and sold 11. I had 11 at that time. But, being on a farm, I was a Chevelle guy and a Chai 5 guy. Oh, I'd have, a $50 junk car because the bumper was good on it.
Yeah.
So, but I still had 11 cars.
How many of them ran?
Maybe 3.
Yeah.
Maybe 3 ran.
I went through a bunch of 55 to 57 Chevys, and I remember buying one 4-door because it had the California seamless frame. So on 55 Chevys, the frames were made of one of two ways. Either they took two pieces, two U channels, put them together, welded them top and bottom, or they manual formed the frame out of one piece of metal by folding it over and then welding along the top. And, if you were going to a car show or if you were worried about weight, you wanted the California frame, it's called. And
Buddy had one, but my dad's probably had 20 some Tri-5s over the years, and he never had a California West Coast frame before, but a buddy had one, and I thought that was the coolest thing ever. I was a little bitty nugget, and I'd crawl underneath all the Tri-5s and look at the frames, and when I was like 8 years old, I knew what I was looking for. So.
Oh, well, it's amazing what we used to throw away too. I can remember I had a 4-door with air conditioning in it. It was a 56, and we just basically cut up the pieces. And the area I lived in is a river called the Russian River, and the reason it got its name is it's really susceptible to flood stage. And what the community decided to do was to take all these old wrecked cars and cable them up along the riverbank, and they dressed the river. And it was supposed to stop the logs and the trees and the pieces from getting on to the fields that were being, they had produce and things like that, mostly trees. But we just took the parts for the old car and put them down at the river because that's where all the other old cars were,
There was some of them wives' tales, or, I found some, like I grew up in Northern Illinois, and there was a guy from Cambridge that used to do my transmissions. He drug one out, one of them that was put in a riverbank, for to keep the riverbank from washing away. And this was probably, I have a picture of it in a hot rod photo album from like 78. And it was like a 32 Chevy or a 32 Buick and a straight axle, candy brandywine, blower. I mean, he built this thing up and is like, oh yeah, I got it for $25 out of that riverbank. And by the time I found this riverbank that everybody talked about, when I was 16 or 17, it was like, they were all, you could barely tell that it was a car. It was quite a few years later.
Yeah, I think it's it's amazing what people can start with and end up with something that's beautiful, and at the same time, it's amazing what people will throw away. So literally just
obviously
out the door it goes.
Right from the start, like I was, because my dad, and my uncle were car guys. When did you go to a college before? Well, one, did you take any auto classes in school? Did your school have any auto programs?
We had an auto shop, but I think a lot of the wood shops and the auto shops were used by the schools to hire somebody who would either be the baseball coach or the football coach. And the truth was they didn't know a lot about wood, and they didn't know a lot about metal, and they definitely didn't know about, connecting with people on that level. They just taught those classes, kept you from cutting your fingers off, and then coached the football team. So like our metal shop, our auto shop teacher, he really didn't, he was a great guy. He was a good football coach, but he really didn't make it so that you wanted to do more things in the shop and sort of learn those things. But I, after high school, I went to Santa Rosa Junior College, and there was a welding teacher. And I remember, I forget what it was. I was either taking general ed because I thought I would transfer to a 4-year college or something. And I was just feeling that sort of post 18-year-old drift where you don't know exactly what you care about, you know? And this guy, this welding teacher, he was a young guy. I mean, he was like, he's like a gunslinger. He was just this coolest dude that, and he just, you when you're around him, you had a feeling that doing this welding, knowing how to weld, is just about the coolest thing in the world. And I took that class. I got out of it. He actually found me a job doing aluminum welding, TIG welding, repairing cylinder heads and things like that. Nothing glamorous, no racing stuff, just stock block things. But he was just a great person to make you feel that to know something, to know how to do something was more important than what the world decided to put it. I have a lot of friends who are metal shapers, and a number of people that can make a car out of a flat set of sheet metal in the United States is probably, you could count them on, maybe about both your fingers in your hands. But the average CPA makes more money than these guys will ever make. And they have incredible skills, And I don't think our school system really finds a way to get people enthusiastic about, what's basically a labor that you do with your
farming
hands.
Area, so they just kind of thought everybody would mostly work with their hands. And kind of going back to our woods and metal teacher was the football coach. I never took the metals class. I took the woods and drafting from him, and he was an amazing woodworker. So he wasn't just the coach, but he was one of those guys that one of the first to instill that. My dad, he made everything with angle iron and cutting torches and hammers and stuff. But Mr. Hall was one of the first guys that was like, hey, anything worth doing is worth doing right. And he was a perfectionist. So one of my biggest stresses, I worked at the local body shop down the way from the school, and we worked on his truck when I was in high school. And you talk about one of the most nerve-wracking customers. Mr. Hall, I know he's grading my work, and he expects anything we're done doing is worth doing right. So, I always remember Mr. Hall that. So,
well, those guys are and gals, anybody that loves their craft and connects with it. My wife's a weaver. And there are all these people that are connected to those kind of sort of, they're more than a hobby. They're more like a passion, and there's just some incredibly talented people. The world doesn't seem to have put a lot of stock in that. So you got to kind of take it from your own strength, but I just think it's really impressive. I think back to Boyd's shop in Southern California, and those fellows that were working there, the Swedes and Mexicans, and a little bit of everybody, they were the best in the world. I've been inside and underneath those old 60s and 70s Ferraris, and they're maybe the most expensive cars, but the cars out of people like Boyd and Little John and Bowder and Fat Jack and Thalen and people like that. And Northern California, it was Roy Brizio, and Steve Mole and folks. They're the best in the world.
Okay, we jump around a little bit. We're going to go back a little bit to your Santa Rosa Junior Community College right now, right?
Yeah, and then, Santa Rosa Junior College. Yeah, so I was working in the welding shop, and it was going good, and it was, skilled labor on a little bit more than just transient level, but I'd always drawn cars. And when I was in high school, I went down to Southern California and visited Art Center. But man, I was like this, sort of pimple-faced kid. I was not ready to get in my car and go to LA. And I remember I had so I was working at the welding job. I just bought a 71 454 Chevelle turbo hydro, and had a lot of go and no woe. So I stuck it through a section of guardrail up on 128, which is a windy road going between Cloverdale and Lakeport. And I just got up the next morning and thought, this is going nowhere. I'm having a great time, but it's going nowhere. So I started looking back into going to Art Center. And, it was really my mom that put everything together and made it work at the end of the day. And, so I went back to school and went to Art Center. At Art Center, the pecking order on potential jobs was GM was the biggest and the best. At that time, not many of the European companies were hiring yet. Now they hire significantly at Art Center. And, so I just set my sights on getting a job at GM, and I decided I was going to do anything it took to get it.
That went to Art Center. And Tom Taylor. Who else have we had? So somebody else.
Yep.
But like, is Art Center just like something like
Chip's gone?
You have to be like accepted, right? To Art Center, do you like have to put a proposal together? Like they don't just take. Do they? No, if you've got the money, do they let you in?
Well, not really. In fact, what's unique about Art Center is the chairman or the chair, not the chairman, but the chair of the department you're applying to actually reviews the portfolios. So that's the person that knows the best about whether, in your 3 to 4 years, depending on how fast you do it, are you going to get to a level that will most likely find you a job? And other colleges don't do that. They have admissions departments that are separate from the chairs, and they review the portfolios. So, but there's the stories of Pete Brock walking in, taking the tour and stuff like that, and then find out you got a portfolio and then walking out to his car and making one, But then that's Pete Brock too. So, not everybody's Pete Brock. But no, I think the portfolio is an important part of it. And really, you also have to be at a certain maturity level. I mean, when I was working at College for Creative Studies, and I had taught for a semester or so at Art Center also, you want to make sure that the person that's going to come in is really up to the task, because you're working like an adult. You're not working like some kid in a high school.
Things Mr. Hall in high school drafting taught you, at the Woods class when you had it, all the tools were there. But if you showed up a draft, this was like right at the edge. We were still penciling drafting, because I went into high school in the 80s. And I always remember like this one kid always never brought us pencils. Oh, can I borrow a pencil? Can I run back to my locker and get a pencil? No, you sit there and you get a 0 today, because when you're an adult and you show up on the job without your tools, they're not going to give you tools or let you go home to get your tools. And that was another thing. You're not going to get paid. Yeah, you're not going to get paid. So that's another thing that I always remembered too.
Well, there's a great little book about an advertising guy who was writing about what it takes to succeed in these kinds of jobs, creative jobs, things like that. And there's a great line in there where he says, it's not how good you are, it's how good you want to be. And, that puts the onus back on the individual to decide on their own terms, how far am I going to go? And there's stories of, there's a guy in town here that owns a prototype shop. And he, back in the 50s, got a job working for Barris. And, there's the old story about literally sanding the whole car with one piece of sandpaper because he thought that's all he had, And, when you push yourself to that level, and, this from the cars you build, and the people you know. When you're at that level, that top level, it's not about what your boss expects. It's about what you expect. So, I went to Art Center, and you found a lot of people like that. You found, we had Harry Bradley as an instructor. We had a guy by the name of Ted Yunkin, and we had a shop teacher who was ex clay modeler at, I think he was a Ford clay modeler at one time, Joe, and Joe and Ted and these other folks, they just knew what the ultimate quality level was that could be achieved,
So how was it
and they
having
really pushed
Harry
you to do
Bradley
that.
as an instructor? I always
It made the world a
respected
difference.
his work. Um, I got to meet him a couple times going to
It's
Custom Camps of America shows because he used to give the Harry Bradley Design Award and show up, and then he got so he really couldn't travel, so he didn't come anymore.
yeah,
So I got to meet him just a couple times. I didn't really get to hang out or just
yeah.
kind of meet him, told him I
Well,
was a fan, and that was about it.
yeah. Well, Harry was he was an intimidating guy, and at the same time, he was um, he was very accessible on the level of caring about what you're doing. And his classroom trick was to stand at the chalkboard because there were still chalkboards in the room, and with his back to the chalkboard, and he'd reach behind himself with a piece of chalk, and he'd draw a car about,
Oh wow!
and while he's telling you what it is you're going to learn. And I mean, you know, he was also famous for doing demos where he would just grab a pen and grab whatever, and he just, I mean, full speed, do what took you hours to do, and then he'd wad it up in a ball and throw it away. So, but he was great. He could really react to the passion he saw in people doing what they were working on. And I actually ended up working for Harry for about a couple of months after I graduated, because
Does
I
that
was
mean I
in
assume
between
my question I've already
activities or
answered in
in
my
between
mind?
jobs.
Were you
Yeah.
one of the top kids in your class? Because, like I always say, just because you went to medical school doesn't make you an A+ doctor. There's still a guy that graduated with a D average and is still a doctor out there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You're competing with 0.001% of the general population. You could come from Cloverdale when you could outdraw anybody. I mean, when I left Cloverdale, wasn't a person in that city could draw a car better than me. But I got to Art Center and I was at the bottom of that rack, you know. Um, but I think what happens with design is it takes more than just one skill. It takes a combination of things. And one of the things that was fortunate for me was just in the first semester I was there, I met Chris Bangle, who ended up the head of BMW design. And Chris was just finishing his program there, and I was just starting mine. It was a 4-year program that you could do in 3 years because they did trimester. And Chris and his roommate were looking for a third person to fill in for him because rent's cheaper when there's 3 of you splitting it instead of 2 of you. And he says, and so one day I was talking to him because I just met him by accident, and I said, yeah, I got to find a new place. The place I've got, it's just a drag. And he goes, well, we got some room. And I moved in with those guys, and they didn't necessarily teach me about design, but they taught me how to do everything else more efficiently. Like whether it was something as simple as buying art supplies or, doing this or doing that. And even though we overlapped only I think about 4 months we overlapped, it was a really valuable time to learn from somebody that had already obviously got through the program successfully and was very talented in the process. So, I had a good time there. Yes, I did graduate with honors, and that's one of the most important things to me in life. I got an A in Harry's class, which meant more than anything in the world. And but no, it takes a lot of skills and a lot of different things to be successful in the business. So just because you got an A in Harry's class doesn't mean
we have cats
the
that show up
runway's
every once
all
in a while,
set,
so
as they say.
Turbo seems to like you, so he wants to be part of it. So.
I see that. Now, is that a shop? Is that a shop
Just a house
cat,
cat.
or is it
Two
just a house
spoiled
cat?
princesses. Well, they're guys,
Prince.
but yeah, there's spoiled rotten house cats. Yeah.
Oh, because I hang out with a lot of guys on the Bonneville team that have cats that are either shop cats or cats that are part of in one guy's case, 8 cats that have their own room with these trails and things all over the place. And he's one of the drivers on the Bonneville car. And we got a lot of cat. We got a lot of cat mojo on our race team.
Dan Webb's daughter. She runs an Instagram page called Cat Rodders.
Yeah.
For shop cats and house cats that are hot rod. Yeah.
Oh, I contribute to that.
Well, it was started by one of the Root brothers, maybe.
Oh, that's
and then
cool.
Ashley is the one that's got the keys to it right now. So yeah, that's Ashley.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I remember Ashley when she was just like, well, she was really small because I had my Chevy in Dan's shop for a while, and I probably wore out my welcome there more than anyone.
Had that little streamlined
that's
tricycle
cool.
that he built for her. And what did she carry around when she was little? Like maybe about the time that he won the Riddler or something. She had a little stuffed rabbit or something that she drug around everywhere. It was just filthy as hell. When she was like 4 or 5. That's what I remember. That's how long I've known Ashley. So.
I can remember. Well, I rode with Dan and that 32 that he won the Riddler with down to Bobby Griffey's because he was getting a Bobby Griffey interior. And that was some of my first days into the serious hot rodder area, Prior to that, it was just sort of standing on the outside of the circle looking
Ashley
in,
and Corey on here as a couple guests, and we're trying to get Dan on here, and he's like, well, he's worried about cussing too much.
Well, yeah, that probably.
Or just have
you might
Ashley
need that little
beside
button
him, and she'll keep him calm a little bit.
Noise.
So okay, you get done. How many years did you go? Did you do your art center in 3 or 4 years?
I did it in 3, and the only because it's a trimester, it's basically 8 semesters, like a 4-year program, and I started college when I was 23, so I wanted to get on.
The history of the art center, you do there's like an ending project or something. Some guy named Chip Foose went there, and he did that hemisphere was like one of his ending projects. What was what did you do for your project?
Yeah, I was very corporate minded. So even though I drew a lot of hot rods in Harry's class, I knew I wanted to go to work with, at the best place in the world. So we were sponsored towards about halfway through your program, you get what are called sponsored projects, which are, corporations that contribute a certain amount of finances to either make the models or do something. And we had, I think we had Honda as our final corporate sponsor. And we did something kind of funky like motorcycles or something like that. But it was, it was just an incredible place. Still is an incredible place. I mean, I think they've probably made more of an influence on automotive design. There's only a handful of schools globally. There's like 6 of them that are at a serious level. And really art centers,
so I jump out of
in the top echelon of that.
ADD or whatever, my questions pop into my head. So at this last Roadster show, you were on a design panel, and there was a guy on there. I feel bad I don't. Is he a current instructor at the art center? Yeah, right.
Dave Merrick. Yeah, the Honda guy.
Oh no, Dave's the one that sometimes
Dave
does
Merrick,
podcasts
big guy
with Brad Fanshaw, right?
Yeah. Okay, there was a session before the one
Yeah,
I
that's
was
the guy I'm
in
thinking of.
that had
Yeah.
Stuart Reed in it. Yeah, Stuart.
Okay.
Stuart was a chair of transportation for a long time. He's retired, but he may have an
Okay.
advisory role in some of their activities and stuff. But yeah, I didn't make Stuart's one because we were chasing down Greg Sharp, but
Yeah.
I saw
It
that he
was
was on the
again
roster.
out of
Yeah.
order. It was good to see Greg Sharp, and during the Hall of Fame banquet, that's why Greg Sharp was always what Greg Sharp did, and he stood up and because he doesn't really see, so he wasn't reading anything. And who was it that he helped? Was it Robert Williams he helped induct?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Um, was he doing Robert?
Dave
I
Sutton
can't
started
remember if he was
Robert,
doing
but
Robert or
maybe it
who
was
he
some.
was doing.
Anyway, he got up and he just had the dates and the this and the this and the. Yeah.
No, he did
Right.
Larry Wood. He did Larry Wood. Yeah, it's, Dan Wood started Larry Wood
Mm-hmm.
because they were both in the early times, and then Greg finished it off. But we've been working with Greg on some things, and he's incredible. I can call him up and say, "Hey, I got this picture of a '29 Model A Roadster. It's out on the Bonneville Salt Flats, probably late '50s because there's a '56 Chevy in the background, and it's got a number of such and such." I said it's probably running gas, and he'll say, "Oh, that's so and so and so and so," like just boom, 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 boom. And I've been helping Steve Coonan on the Rotters Journal, and we got a little article in the next one that's coming out. Um, and Greg was just super. He was just, I mean, he's got a mind like, you know, gonna put that, we got to hook a giant electrical cord up to that thing and get all the mojo out of it.
So you got
like
done with Art Center, and you said you went to work for Harry Bradley for a little bit.
Well, what happened was I was I got married like the week after I graduated, and my then wife and I moved to Michigan. And as soon as it snowed, like 4 months into my stint at General Motors, uh, she was like, "Nope, we're going back to Pasadena. I'm out of here." So I took a leave of absence, and I was in LA, and somehow Harry got word that I was on the loose, and I think he was trying to help me, more than just about a job. And Harry was just a really great guy, And so I'd go to his house and we'd work on something. They were like different reports. He was doing stuff for Toyota and some of the then fairly new design facilities in Southern California. And I think Harry knew just about everybody. And so he gave me some work, and it really helped me, and it got me thinking back about, getting after things. And then I actually took a job up in Santa Barbara. So I stopped working for Harry. And so, yeah, it was wild. He's, he was an incredible talent, but his influence, I mean, I don't know if you know Tom Peters. Tom was a long-term GM designer, lifetime GM designer.
At the bar at the last past Roadster show. And I knew who he was, but I didn't want to super fan out.
Okay, yeah,
I would love to have to get him on the podcast here too. But I was talking to his daughter, Adrian, and they were kind of looking at me like, "Are you just flirting with her? Because she's a good-looking lady." Adrian. I was like, "No, I remember and I was blank on who she was at first, but we used to build dollar cars for GM for SEMA, and that's back when she was working with, like, calling Jamie Meyer. She was like under him, and then GM Performance, and that was the time when we were doing all those OEM SEMA builds, and I was like, that's how I know who she was. So, and then I kind of walked away, and I was like, I did give him a podcast card. So,
well, Tom's got a lot of respect for Harry, and I think a lot of other people that had Harry as an instructor or just looked at his work. I mean, Harry's one of the extremely short list of people that actually worked for Ford, GM, and Chrysler.
Yeah, I have a bunch of saved stuff, like when he used to do like some of the
sketch articles, it was great.
And custom and stuff like that. And I have a Mercury project coming up, and I have a bunch of saved Harry Bradley artwork stuff of some stuff is like out in left field, but some stuff is like, oh yeah, that would work. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he was Planet Janet on some projects, but yeah, I saved everything. I've got a fat file folder over in the cabinet across the office here, and it's got all Harry's stuff in it. He used to do those whole annual issues where he'd draw like that must have been, that must have been work. That's what that was. But yeah, Harry was a amazing guy.
So you said you ended up, where'd you say after you were at Harry's, you went up? What time?
So okay. I went to Santa Barbara, worked for a company doing buses, and then I went to work for this crazy motorcycle guy by the name of Tracy Nelson, and into a little bit of that, motorcycles and hanging out with those guys and stuff like that. And then I thought, you know what, you're never really going to learn this craft unless you get to a big organization. If you're the most senior person there, then the learning's harder. And so I worked it so that I could go back to GM. I went back to General Motors.
Did your wife go with
you? So I spent about 14 years at GM. And yeah, for a while. For a while. And then, I think we realized that we weren't making headway. So we parted ways. But no, I went to GM and I had some great years there. I had a period in the 90s where, man, we were just tearing it up. I was working in Cadillac Studio, and we just had a great group of people.
What cars were you part of at Cadillac? And I think I know a little bit, but I'm not 100% sure. What cars were you part of?
We redid almost the total product line leading up into 92. So the 92 Seville, which was car of the year, 92 Eldorado, also the big cars. And so that was just, I was working for this guy, his name's Dick Rusin. And he had that great balance between telling you what you ought to do, but not telling you how you ought to do it, And so that was really about the best working conditions I think I had in 40 years of Cadillac, working for car companies.
Had what year was your DTS DHS? And now she's got a 2008 STS. Can you give me the guy's home address that makes it responsible that you have to pull the bumper cover off to change the headlight bulb? I want that guy's home. I am going to haunt him.
I hate to break it to you. Tim, but the guy is probably a German.
I have been mad enough.
Because what happened
if he's back home in Germany, I'll fly and visit him.
Okay, well, listen, I would say it's mostly Dick, who also did the 917 Porsche. So, what happened was in the 80s, mid 80s, the perception of quality tightened up considerably, and Volkswagen Group and Audi Group were like the spearhead for that. They had these really flush-looking exteriors with minimal overlap between. So in the old arena of headlights, you moved the whole headlight when you adjusted it. Well, what the Germans got to was to move the internal components in the headlight and not move the outer housing. Well, because you're assembling this thing, most of those cars are a fascia off or a front end off to do any work on them. So you have to pull the entire, which, hey, is great for the service department and the the CPA or the lawyer or the hedge fund manager that owns that thing, he does it. That's $10,000 instead of two. That's okay. But that perception of quality has tightened up so much, and the Japanese were a big part of it too. But the Germans were actually the ones that really got to the point to where you had to disassemble a front to take care of what had been normally serviceable items. Well, they're also the home of $6,000 headlight now, so we can blame them for a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, they're beautiful. It's amazing that they can even stand up to being left outside and still look so nice.
So, how long were you at General Motors back?
Generous Motors. I lasted about 14 years, and one of the things when you come from a rural area like Northern California where there's no big employers, people aren't really wired for that job for life, And one of those things that I remember distinctly was the shop areas of design had all these little mobile tabourets. They're basically a rolling toolbox, but it was the guys working stuff. And then when they were working on the prototypes or they were building something for you, they'd roll their toolbox over and they'd have all their specific things. And then the general tools were, off the wall someplace. And I went in there once and a guy had a piece of paper. It said 3,241 or something like that. And I was standing there, and while he was standing there, he goes over the Xerox machine, gets this printout, pulls it out of the paper, then comes over, pulls out the 3,462 and puts in 3,461. And I said, "What's that?" And he goes, "That's a number of days I got left before I can retire." And I thought, when your job becomes about that, about, just surviving until you get to some arbitrary software determined retirement point, that was, I was just not in my kind of thing.
You're at GM. Is this when you started doing some stuff for Boyd on the side?
Yeah. Actually, what I did is, when you just bought a house and you got a new car and you got all this other stuff, there's never enough budget to build a hot rod, So I was thinking, if I built a hot rod, I really should build a Chevy, And so I started looking around. There's no internet, but you start talking to your buddies. And one of the buddies I had was this guy out of Santa Barbara that ran a pickup parts place by the name of Seth Dalton, I think was his name. And Seth goes, I said, "Say, Seth, I'm trying to find some hot rodders in Detroit, and I know you got business here." He goes, "Oh, well, go see this guy by the name of Sonny Rinke." And so I go up to, I call Sonny Rinke up, and I said, "Hey, Sonny, I'm looking for some Chevy parts to build like a 32 hot rod." And he goes, "Well, hey, I'm the guy." And so I went up to see him, and his shop the shop he worked in was just up the street. And they were a prototype Kirksite shop. And in fact, they did all the 55 to 57 Chevy reproduction parts. It was called Experimental, but they fed a bunch of other people because they had big stamping machines and things like that. And so we cut a deal to get a 32 Ford frame that I could start working on. And then we slowly, over a period of time, he had me doing more and more and little sketches for him and stuff. And I did a catalog for him. And he actually supplied me with a whole reproduction 32 Chevy body, which the owner had decided to replicate because he had one that had been in his family. And too bad his family didn't have a Ford because he'd have made a lot more money. But this was way before Brookville got into the bodies. And through Sun, I kind of went on the circuit with him to some of the bigger events like the Nationals and the one up in Minnesota, back to the 50s, stuff like that. And I was standing. I've done a whole bunch of hot rod sketches because I thought I could find some more freelance work, and I'd put them up in the experimental booth, and there were like different ways to do a Chevy and stuff. And Sonny says, "Hey, there's this guy looking for you, and he's a hot rodder, and he said he'd meet you out front at about 2:00, And so I go out front of the building. It's about 2:00, and I'm standing there looking at this 44, and I'm looking at this little hood strip that the guy had obviously made himself. It was a beautiful little detail. And up walks Jack Chisnall, and I didn't know Jack. I didn't know Vintage Era. I didn't know anything. But Jack is a really cool dude. And we started talking about hot rods, and we had a great conversation. Didn't really turn into anything right at that moment, but we talked on and off next couple of months, and then he calls me up and he goes, "Hey, you work on Cadillacs, right?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "You know anything about old Cadillacs?" I said, "Yeah, I know a little bit about old Cadillacs." I said, like books and stuff like that. And he goes, "Well, this friend of mine wants to do a custom Cadillac." And I said, "Well, what does he want to do with it?" And he goes, "Well, he just wants to build a custom car that he can take to events and do things, And he goes, "It's Billy Gibbons and ZZ Top." And I said, "Well, that's cool." I said, "How do you know Billy?" Because I was putting air conditioners in a couple of his cars.
Timeline like we do.
And
Billy had already done the Eliminator Coupe before Cadzilla. That was all over MTV and sparked a generation of hot rodders. We got the younger kids that got sparked from Fast and Furious, but those ZZ Top videos on MTV with the street rod it blew up the street rod industry. It really did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a Thalen car, and Billy always. I think Billy always had a really good sense of what's right and what's right, and over the years, we still talk. Over the years, he was going to custom cars and stuff when he was a little kid. It wasn't some Hollywood thing.
When I had my TV show, he was on my TV show as a bit part and came, and we drove a hot rod that we built on the TV show, and it gives me his business card. Yeah, I've told this story. I thought I was going to kill Billy Gibbons because you're building this car in a month, and he shows up 3 days before the deadline, and my TV producer thought, "Hey, we're going to put all the GoPros in it. You guys are going to cruise around take it on a few mile cruise." It'd been to the corner and back, so I was like, "Okay, make sure the cotter pins are in it, nut and bolt everything. I don't be responsible for killing Billy Gibbons." But everything worked okay. But he gives me his business card. Not his business card you can actually get a hold of him, an email address that he never answers, kind of like you and your Instagram account. And it said real small, Billy Gibbons, and then real big, it says friend of Eric Clapton. And I still have that. It's like, it's the coolest business card I have.
Well, he's, over the length of that project, there was just more little things and things that happened. But, Sonny got me to meet Jack. Jack got me to meet Billy. Billy got me to meet Boyd.
So before this, you'd never, you obviously knew who Boyd Coddington was, but you
in
never
all of
met
that,
him or never worked with him before Cadzilla.
No, I dealt with a few of the hot rod guys because I did the Bonneville posters from about 83 to about 88. So through that, I knew Dean Moon and a couple folks like that, but I never got to the serious side of the street rod stuff. I was always kind of intimidated, but more so, there wasn't a relevant reason to walk through the door. I knew I'd met Tom Taylor because he knew one of the guys that was the roommate that moved out, a guy by the name of Ed Golden. And those two guys showed up at our apartment when I was a student, but nothing other than, I'd seen a couple of his sketches and I knew that he was a talented guy, But yeah, No, in fact, when I started drawing Cadzilla, uh, I did it because Jack said, "Well, write down what you would do, and send it to me, and Billy and I will talk it over." And I thought, well, heck, I started writing, and I thought, oh, the heck with this, I'll just make a drawing, and that was the drawing. So there was only really one drawing.
Mhm.
There was a lot of drawings to fill out all the details, but there was only one drawing that sold
And
Godzilla.
at that time, like I know my dad worked at a
But
big.
yeah, it was.
We have automatic cat feeder going off, and there he goes. So yeah, and like my dad worked at a place that did like heavy equipment, coal mine industry stuff. And the day you walked in, I forget what you probably know the word. You signed a thing, and they gave you $1 like a royalty thing. So like while you worked there, if you come up with anything, invented the world or whatever, they own that design.
Oh
yeah,
yeah, yeah. That's why, like on Cadzilla, I said, Billy, I said, you got to list your name first, so you're the prior one. And I got into a little bit of trouble over the years, mostly with Illumacoop, because it ended up going to the New York Auto Show. But I'd get into a little, but GM was a little looser. Now they might be a little tighter. I mean, I know some guys that work both at GM and at Chrysler and Ford that do things. And the companies usually are not, they're not so aggressive. They're going to shut you down unless it's affecting your work or it's affecting their sales.
Chrysler. So, and I know this one guy, he does some T-shirt art for people and will design some stuff and then sells artwork at events and stuff. But it's all old, huh?
Chris Pisaccioni. Is that
no,
Chris?
It's
is that Chris
Zimmerman? Dan Zimmerman. Yeah. Oh,
okay, Zimmerman. Yeah. Okay, yeah. I know Dan from meetings. I don't know his hot rod stuff. But
searched me out at SEMA because we were like Instagram friends, and he's done a couple sketches for me on some things.
Oh, cool. That's good. No, I it's funny when we started Cadzilla, I tried to approach Cadillac when we started Illumacoop, I tried to approach Cadillac about putting a motor into it, and they were just, it was a non-starter. But literally a few years later, when Chip was doing the one, and I can't remember what the name of it was, but he was working for Boyd now at this time, and they did one, and Cadillac gave him anything they wanted. So things move on.
I listen to a lot of other podcasts. Good. And you were on. I'd like you to tell this part of the story if you don't get in trouble for doing it. You were on the Chris Coddington Hot Rods by Boyd podcast, and you told the story about that you were drawing after hours on one of the big boards in the studio.
Oh yeah. The way that car companies at that time, and I think they still do this to a certain degree, only they're probably prints of a digital file now. But to buy off on something or to move forward on something, they would usually require a full-size one-to-one drawing of it inside view. And these boards were immense. They were literally about 25 feet long, 20 feet long, maybe 20 feet long. And they were on counterbalances, so they moved up and down. It was real easy to move them. And you had 3 on your side, and then the studio that was next door to you, and there were 22 studios, separate rooms. The studio next door to you would have 3 more on theirs. Well, on the back of their boards, nobody ever looked at that stuff, and as long as you didn't have yours up and theirs down, you didn't even see it. So I figured out that the only way for me to make a full-size drawing at Cadzilla, because we were going to this meeting with Boyd in Louisville, was to do it on the backside of one of those boards. And I was always working later or working earlier than somebody, And so I just pulled out a piece of vellum. I stretched it out to full length, and GM was kind enough to donate it, uh, and I drew this up, and it was funny. The only guy that ever caught me working on it was a guy by the name of Dave Holes. And when Dave Holes hired into GM, he had a 49 Ford lowered with a Carson top. I don't think it was, I don't know if it was skirted or not. I remember seeing one shot of it, but he was a full-on custom guy. And he comes in and he goes, and I started to move to roll the board down, and he goes, "What are you doing?" And I thought, okay. So I said, "Hey, this buddy of mine in California is building this custom Cadillac." And, and he goes, "Well, what is it?" And I said, "Well, because it's the street rod event you want to go to." I said, "It's a 48 seed net, and I said, my dad had a 53, and I never liked the 53s because they always looked like they had like two fenders on them instead of one. They had like waterfall, waterfall, waterfall. And I always liked the 49s because I thought they were cleaner and they were more European to start with, more contemporary. So he goes, "Well, pull it down." And we're talking about the back, and I'm talking about the fins. And he goes, "No, you can't get rid of the fins. You can't do it with the fins. Some things you just got to find a way to include them." And so I thought that was good input, and I changed what I was doing in the back end, and that's the way the car ended up, But no, nobody knew about it except Dave, and he probably just forgot about it. But one of the guys with the tabourets that had all the dates on it, when he was going to retire, he knew of the car, and I forget how, but he asked me if I could give him some pictures of it. And so I gave him some sheet metal, in metal shots of it. And he put them on his taboret under the glass. And the vice president, who I knew he knew George Barris, but I didn't know if he liked any of those cars or not, because George was always trying to hustle parts or something. And he walks down and he's in the shop and he looks at these pictures and he goes, "What's that?" And if you do Chuck, you'd know by saying, "What's that?" He meant, what's wrong. And Greg said, "Oh, that's that car Erickson's working on for that guy in California." And he goes, "Can I borrow one of these?" And Greg goes, "Sure." And the shop was about an eighth of a mile from our studio. And Greg calls me up on the phone. He goes, "Hey, Chuck's got a picture of the car and he's coming your way."
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, this is where it all ends, And he walked in and he goes, "Erickson, what's this?" And I said, "That's a custom car that I got." "That's great." And as soon as Chuck said it was great, then it was great for everybody. So no problems after that. Yeah, it was a fun times. Everything was going well.
Yeah, that
we were doing good.
It was built kind of quick, wasn't it, for what it was? I mean, they say a hand-built car.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did it in about 6 months, and the only way they got there was obviously Craig Naff and the guys in the shop, and it's kind of unusual because Craig wasn't at Boyd's that long. I think he was there a few years, but no, I'd go out about every 3 weeks. And we were working overtime. So on Saturday, at about 11 o'clock, I'd head to the airport. That's when you could literally walk in, get on a plane, and fly within the same half hour, And then I'd get to LA at about, 3, 4 o'clock. And then we'd work till 2 in the morning and go to some fashionable restaurant, all dirty.
Yeah,
and
a few episodes ago, we had Steve Anderson that worked at Hot Rod. Him and Rob Canan were the ones that drove it across country, so we had some good Cadzilla stories with Steve driving that thing.
Yeah, I was on the phone with him earlier today, and I was just I drove it across L.A. I drove it from Pomona Swap Meet, the Father's Day event, to Boyd's shop. I don't know how the hell those guys ever got that thing all the way across the country, because there was like a football field of concrete in front of you that you did not see. You could see a 1 foot high object, 50 feet in front of the car, but if it was on the ground, you never see it. But yeah, it was a runner too, man. It was a strong
so
runner.
You get done with Cadzilla. You're still at GM, and then you're still doing some stuff for Boyd. When did the time? I know. Well, I forgot I had props over here. I did have. There is.
Oh, you got props? Cool. Cats and props.
Young
quality.
Larry Erickson.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
We've talked about Cadzilla quite a few times on here, and I have a friend that's going to be on here. We're starting a younger, 30 and under, and he's like, I don't like Cadzilla. He's a traditional guy, and he goes, I don't hate it. It's just he's not a modern custom guy. So in case people are listening to this and don't know, that is Cadzilla, one of the most amazing cars ever. So that's what we're talking about. If you're listening to this Hot Rod podcast, you probably know a little bit about that. And then was this car next?
A lot of old cars cut up. Yeah. Yeah, in fact, I drew it on the airplane coming back from working on Cadzilla. And because Boyd had said, well, if you could do anything, what would you do? And I had just seen the photos of Christman's coupe that Larry had Christman restore, and I just thought that was that Ford, those 240 Ford hoods kind of coming together with that super chopped 5-window body. It made this really simple form, and I thought, okay, well, how can you make that simpler?
No.
And I was actually I was single. We were sort of partying all the time, but I had this roommate. He was a clay modeler, and so he just did this little clay model based on a sketch I did on the airplane, and then we scanned that, we took sections off the clay model. But it was, that was, and I just thought it was bitching the way that shop at Boyd. Yeah. I mean, you can do anything with those guys and they come out great.
When you guys were designing that and building that, you were building it for a famous rock and roll guy, and it was being built at Boyd's. Did you ever think at that time this is going to be one of the baddest custom cars in history? Like, people's like, oh, name your top 5 cars or 5 customs anyway, and that car's always mentioned. Did you guys think like, oh, we're just setting the world on fire, or it was just another project for you guys?
I think the Billy factor was probably the overarching impression of something important, and I think we really, I don't think we really took to heart how talented Craig was and how talented that whole shop was, I mean, and those things, because we moved a lot of metal and we did a lot of, I got literally hundreds of little thumbnail sketches about every little part on it,
You should do a book.
But well, we talked about it a couple of times, and I think it was Kevin Osteen or one of those guys was talking about doing something, but Billy's when Billy gets around to doing it, we'll do it. But it's been, no, I don't think we really sunk in. When it sunk into me was Chuck had come back from a vacation it was someplace like Tahiti or something like that. And the DJ in the hotel had that poster stuck to his cubicle, so, it's, I think, when you're doing something like that, you just don't want it to stop, and you feel really, it's like when a car is coming together and it's just ripping, you set it down on its wheels. That's exactly like you want it to set, and you don't have to move the wheel openings, or you don't have to do this because it's just working. And I think we're excited about the way it was going together, but yeah, when it ended up on a lot of lists for people as far as being a really important custom, I think it's,
and as far as I know,
we were fortunate.
Issue that Cadzilla was in, it was the highest selling issue ever of Hot Rod, and they had to do a reprint halfway through that month, is what I've always heard, because it sold so many copies. They did a reprint to get out more copies.
Yeah, they'll tell you that a black or dark cover doesn't really work, and that one, it wasn't even the front or back of the car. But Billy had a lot of ZZ Top was carrying a lot of energy at that time, and so I think it was like perfect little combination, But yeah, Hand Grenade Harry told me it was the largest selling issue they ever printed.
So then you go to the Illumacoop, and that's the one you said almost got you in a little bit of trouble because Cadillac wouldn't give you a motor, and that had Mitsubishi in it, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, Boyd had called me. We tried the Cadillac. We couldn't get one, so we were going to wait for one to get wrecked, but they were just coming out. So it was because we were working on that in about 89, 90, somewhere right in there, So he said, hey, I've been approached by Mitsubishi and they want to put a motor into this. And I said, oh, boy, you got to do what's good for your business. I said, you wanted me to design a car, and personally, I thought you'd create a lot of controversy, but you'll get a lot of attention too, And as it was, it ended up at the New York Auto Show. It was the first time it was publicly shown. And the writer that reviewed the show put a little tiny article on the cover of USA Today that said, if you're going to the car show, this is the only one you got to look at, And the irony of that was that Chuck and I were there with a Cadillac, which was one of these rehashed, repackaged things. And Chuck was on his sort of farewell tour. And we were there at the same show at the same time. It was just a fluke,
So the traditional guys, they weren't a fan of where they thought street rodding was going at that time. And when you did the Illumacoop, did you think that was just, the tip of the iceberg in those crazy hand-built cars? To me, that's kind of the heyday in my mind. I graduated in 89. So I love the Boyd era cars with the billet suspension and the anodizing, because that's when I was really starting to pay attention to stuff. And, the Phantom bodies and the hand belts and the Cadzillas and the Illumacoops. And now there's very few people doing that. Traditional hot rods have came back a little bit more. Did you think this was like the tip of the iceberg? And yeah, Boyd built quite a few and Chip designed a few after that were pushing the envelope of super modern stuff. And then it kind of didn't carry on for a while. I think it's because, obviously not everybody can afford a car like that.
Well, hot rodding goes through those expansion, contraction things at different times. And, what was interesting is Jack Chisenhall actually put together the assessment on where we could build that car. Because before Boyd's, we were just trying to think who could build it, and we sort of thought for a while, you go to special projects like in Detroit or was it the one in Southern California, that does concept cars, but Jack do all the hot rod shops and really Boyd and probably Brizio and a few other folks. But what came after that, where you took these sort of high-end custom builders like Boyd and Thalen and Fat Jack and folks like that. And then you had what I would say is a customer base that's able to support that, is able to fund it, You actually have more of that now than you've ever had. With Cadzilla, there were 3 places in the United States that probably could have built that car in that time, at quality level. Now there's 3 in every state. I mean, I don't know if you know Hans Schelling and the guys down at Mike Cleave's shop, but they make the Pettingale hammers, the giant, they're like $40,000. They've sold more than 50 of those. Restoration, the Steve Moles restoration shops, Steve's Auto Restoration up in Portland. Even shops like Zane. Zane can do amazing things there. They got access to metal guys. They take data. Look at what Troy's doing. And now you have the customer base. Now they're true. They're not all building 32 Fords. A lot of them are building pro touring cars, but the sheer scale of what's taking place right now, people say, the sort of doomsday folks will say, oh, kids don't like cars and, everybody's dying off and it's all going away. But you look at the volume of work right now, it makes
it was like
85 look like
I do
kids stuff.
Gigs. I go to SEMA. Like Carrie says, I'll talk to anybody because I'm a fan of builders first, other than being a builder. And it's like all the good shops, they're slammed with super high-end work. And it's expensive to get a car built anymore. If you're building, a chassis and all that, it's a lot of money to build a car anymore. And there's like now you got the next generation of like this year at SEMA, there was a Grand National that the Dutch boys built for Angelo that was just it was really mine. I still like old stuff. If I could work on lead sleds, customs, and 48 and older stuff too, I would be totally happy. I don't really want to work on stuff in the 80s, but sometimes we have to. I say we're hot rod whores, so we have to do what pays the bills. But it's really cool to see that next generation. A few years ago, Greenings built an amazing third-gen Camaro, high-dollar car. And it's so those next guys, that was their dream car when they were in high school or whatever. So now they're spending money. So the industry is evolving. Everybody didn't know if it was going to, like Cadzilla, I remember either reading an article or hearing something on a podcast that Cadzilla was a 49, right? And they didn't know where it was going to be showed because NSRA was the big shows, 48 and older hard line. Now it's opened up to 30 years, but that's how the industry has changed. Now you're building cars from the 80s and going and winning the SEMA show.
Well, nobody's ever put out a definition of hot rod, and actually it's not just a noun, it's a verb. But I think as long as people have the ability to construct these things and do them, that timeline will keep moving. I grew up with 510 Datsuns and 510 Datsuns just as good as a 55 Chevy as a 32 Ford to me.
His kid, he's going to be a photographer. He's already shooting for Formula Drift, and he's just 16. He got a Civic. We helped him drive, him and his dad, to pick up a Honda Civic for a driver the other day. His hot rod is, I think he said it's a 90. That is his car that him and his dad are working on. It's a 90 Mercedes wagon. That's an old hot rod to him because he's 16 years old. He's got a 1990 car. Oh, yeah. That's his old hot rod. It hurts my head a little bit, but.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, I think the ability to share information, whether it's YouTube or your program or whatever it is, that's a big enabler because now people, one of my favorite questions is to ask somebody is, how did it happen? How did you end up with this being such an important part of your life? And sometimes it's a person, their dad or their uncle or neighbor or their whatever. Sometimes it was standing on a street corner and seeing something to go by. and you've got more cars out. Cruising is transitioned from this menace to society to a fundraiser for local communities. It's all kinds of change. So, long-winded version of I think there will continue to be significant cars of all kinds of different vintages. And I think the thing we've got to watch out for is, because we're a litigious society, is that we keep the ability to modify cars, do things to them, and they don't end up being just simply sequestered over to the people that use them like a toaster. So, but no, it's hey, we had a good time to be in it at the level we were, and now I went to the Rock for the first time this year. I'd heard about it a lot, but I just wanted to go there, and it was just a really cool show. It wasn't like 2,500 cars; it was like 500 cars or less, but you just felt like you were with your tribe.
Yeah, we've not made it to that.
You were with like-minded souls
in the fall, but
Well, I tell you, I go to Goodwood Festival a lot because my wife's English, and we end up in England a lot of times that time of the year, and that's just a massive car event. I mean, it's just the hill climb and the revival. And that's a country that has so much municipal transit. You don't have to own a car there. You can get along just fine. Okay. But a car is more than just getting from A to B. And if you let the people that are just worried about getting A to B decide things, then it won't go well,
Okay. So let's get back. After the Illumacoop, did you do anything else for Boyd after that?
We did. Well, prior to Illumacoop, I think we did a pickup or a couple of things like that. And then really that was about the time Chip came on. And I actually had Chip as a student when I was teaching at Art Center for a short period.
Was Chip a good student?
Boyd needed some.
I mean, we all know Chip as Chip now. Like you talked about Harry Bradley drawn behind his head. I remember the first time, seeing Chip doing his autograph signings. He draws this little sketch for people as they're waiting in line at the SEMA show, whatever. And I remember he drew it upside down for this kid to watch the car come to life. And it hurt my head again. I was like, that boy's from another planet. But tell us a good Chip story. Was he a brown noser?
Oh no! But I'd met him. I'd met him in Santa Barbara because the Santa Barbara car guys were pretty close, and Seth Dalton, I think it is. He'd had Sam do some stuff. And I had met Seth Hammond, who's a Bonneville guy. And so I kind of knew who he was already. And he did an internship back here for Ford, I think. And we got together a couple of times, and I don't think I was the only person that said this to Boyd. But, I said, for you to get to the next level or whatever, you need somebody who's on staff here all the time. And I said, you're crazy not to, because Chip could paint. And that was before he got into so much of the modification, but obviously he figured that out too, and I think it was just a perfect storm. And I imagine his other classmates probably were in awe of his ability to make things, but, when you're at Art Center, you're never the best guy drawing. There's always 3 best guys or 4 best guys or 2 guys and 2 girls, and they're all the best, So the level's kind of like up there. So I imagine he had a pretty good run while he was there. I think he was on scholarship, but Um, no,
Yeah.
it's the fact that he could do it. That was the difference.
Yeah.
You
Very
know.
cool. So where did you go? You left GM, and then where did you end up after you left GM?
Well, I had a chance to go to work for Ford and go to Ford of Europe, and my wife worked for Ford. She worked in the color and materials area at the design group. And so they would take both of us and we could work over there and it'd be near her family. So we did that for about 2 years. And then I came back. That's when I ended up on the Mustang program. And, Ford's not GM. They don't have the same sort of feel to them. And Ford is very family and sort of lifelong member oriented. So when you're a new guy, you're kind of a little bit of an outsider, you know. So, uh, you know, um, I had a good time there and I worked with some talented people, but it was getting to the point to where, it just didn't seem like it would
How long were
continue to
you at Ford?
offer any opportunities to learn, and I really wanted to get about 9 years. And then I'd been approached by the college here, the College for Creative Studies, and their dean had been talking to me for a couple of years, and I knew some of their board members, and I had been on a SEMA board for a while, and so I was just at a point where I sort of been in the studio and did all that stuff, to enough of a degree that I thought, okay, I'll try something different. I thought, well, teaching's fun. You talk to young guys and all that stuff. Well, what I didn't realize is that teaching's a lot of not talking to students and a lot of not talking about design. It's about running a department, And so I lasted about 3 years. And then when we decided to part ways collectively,
What
it was
year was this when
probably
you
a
were
good
done there?
idea for everybody. And so then
Okay.
that was about 2011. And I was just going to set up my own little thing and I really wanted to build stuff. I really want to make physical things, not just drawings, And I mean, working with whether it was Boyd or Mike Cleaves or Ed Scutchfield or any of the metal shapers I've worked with, you always had this great learning experience about what they're doing, And I thought, 9 months on and 3 months off, I can build a lot of a car in 3 months. Just nothing else to do but that, and that never happened. But so yeah, I was on the loose, and a friend who knew I was, knew I'd stopped teaching, called me up and says, "Hey, my buddy needs some relief with a startup company in Florida," and Rivian was in Florida, and they literally were 10 miles from my brother-in-law's house. And so I went down to meet these guys, and they were just cool. There was about 15 of them, maybe less than that. And the owner was 20.
Oh,
I think
wow.
he was 22 or 3 at that time. And on his board of directors was Tom Gale. And I knew Tom because Tom had his hot rod and Dan Webb shop for a while, and I knew Tom's son Jeff, and so we both get on the same plane, and I'm saying, well, what are they doing? He goes, well, they're doing a sports car. It's going to be, little 4-cylinder engine, just kind of like like an everyman's Porsche, and I got down there, and there was, like I said, about 15 people, and there was 3 designers, I think, were already there, and a guy I knew from England by the name of Peter Stevens, who did the McLaren F1. And I knew Peter. And so Peter was juggling back and forth between Europe and Florida. And he said, would you help me out on the weeks that he taught at the Royal College, which is like Art Center of England, He said, well, I'm back at teaching. Would you, back up and come down here? And he says, then I'll have a little bit of work for you on the side. And I thought, oh, this would be great. Did a little bit of a retainer. And it went okay for a while. And then Peter just organized people in a different way than I did. So when I would get there to replace them, the guys that kind of weren't doing so much, I'd put them to work, you know. So I think the owner saw this and he decided, you know, he asked me, would you take this on full time? And I said, well, you know, you got to work this out with Peter. And he says, yeah, I'll do that. And I don't think I know that didn't go well, and I haven't spoke to Peter since then, which is really unfortunate because he's a really good guy. But yeah, he thinks, you know, I think he believes I stole his project, and to some definition, I'm sure he probably isn't too far off. But you know, so anyway, we went like crazy for about I think it was with him about 6 years. And then I knew they were, you know, they were really starting to grow. They were up to about 200 people by this time.
Truck.
And by this time
we did the truck.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, I don't know if you remember the period of time, but post the sort of 2007 collapse of the economy and all the, you know, housing crisis and stuff like that, there was a bunch of money coming into startup small companies and things like this and alternative forms of transportation. And RJ kind of jumped onto it after a graduate program at MIT, and he knew some people. He was really well connected and brilliant guy. And but then over a period of time, this project evolved. First, we went to like a mini truck project. And then we went to a little bit bigger truck project, and we went to a shared truck project, and then we ended up at the electric truck project, you know, and you know, it was dealing with investors, showing different things. We had a big stake in the company, not the only stake, but a stake in the company that was out of the Middle East. So we'd go to the Middle East and do our research and stuff, you know. So it was a real wild time. It was great. I mean, I couldn't imagine being able to do that at that point in my career, you know. And but you know, I was always after RJ that, you know, you got to build a company you need in 20 years. And I said, your first starting design needs to be with the group that will stay with it for 10 years, 15 years. And so there was a guy we wanted to hire in, and his requirement was that, you know, that maybe I wasn't there. And so RJ said, well, I'll give you 2 years. I'll give you 2 years. I'll just pay you, and then we'll figure it out after 2 years, you know. And I think my wife freaked out on that one. And so at that point, we just decided, you know, I was 60 at that time, and they were you know, 6 years old as a car company. So they've done great. Jeff Hamoud, I don't know if you know him, but he's an ex-Chrysler guy. Incredible talent. They just got a great team. You know, every company's facing rough times, the well-known ones and the startup ones. So, you know, I wish them all the best. And they're just, you know, I mean, their car. One of the engineers built this really cool. It was like a dune buggy with a 600cc Suzuki 4-cylinder in it, and man, they'd tear around the parking lot and stuff, and it was just a really cool time. It was a lot of fun.
So the Rivians, they're built in where the Mitsubishi plant used to be, where Uncle Jim worked. They're built in Illinois, and
yeah.
Normal
Illinois,
not Champaign, Bloomington. Yeah, my great uncle that took me to rod runs and custom shows. I talk about him often on our podcast. He worked there when it was a Mitsubishi plant when it first opened, and he's not quite right because he drove 80 miles each way. You know, and this is Illinois countryside, so 80 miles is an hour and a half. That's not like LA traffic or Detroit traffic. And he bought a brand new S10. Yeah. This means nothing, but that's a funny story. When he first got the job there, and he put over 150,000 miles on that truck, driving to work, base S10, not sure if it had air conditioning. It definitely did not have a radio. and he just drove. My aunt loved music, and he just didn't care. So I thought that tells you a little bit about my uncle, that he could just space out. And
It sounds like a hot rodder.
Building
Got an
cars in his
S10.
head.
You know,
We skipped
one of the
over
best
one of
things
your
ever
cars.
built.
So this was Hot Rod 2003. I dug this out today when you did your Chevy Roadster.
Oh yeah, that was
So
my
was that
14-year first build.
the one that you said that you started with experimental body company and started with a 32 chassis and all that?
Yeah. Yeah, we started with a 33 Chevy, original 32 Chevy chassis. We started with experimental body, but Craig Neff reformed the quarters so it looks as much like a Ford as any 32 Chevy ever has. But I got that blower from Dean Moon. That was his showroom model. And we traded some artwork for it. I did a couple of catalog covers for him and some posters. And that's a real Dean.
So
that's a real Dean Moon part.
built
That part.
And it had a small block in it and a blower sitting down in the front like a pop vin setup. We did a DeSoto one time that we did that, but I built a substructure to hold the supercharger so I can underdrive it, so it wasn't 1-to-1. But I was just at the Don Garlick's museum a week ago, and I took a whole bunch of
that's a
pictures.
problem with
They
that
got a Moon dragster down there with a pop vin in it. It's like, that's still one of the best looking motor combos ever to me, is a pop vin blower setup sitting out in the front. Oh, do they?
Moon will still sell you one of those.
Huh.
Yeah. I think they got to schedule the machine work on it, but they probably got a bunch of casting stacked around. They're just a really bitching thing. I mean, I read a little article about a guy talking about buying the right part when he bought his first car, the part that made it a hot rod for him, and there's just parts out there like that are just so cool. You just want to find an excuse to need one.
So where's that car at now? Oh, yeah. Yep.
Wes Rydell. You know Wes?
Huh.
Yeah. Wes has got it up in North Dakota, and I think he's got a beautiful place, so I think it's in a happy spot. But my son and my daughter were both under 4 years old when that car got finished. And I'd start it up. My daughter would run and hide in her room because it was so loud. So I sold it and bought the world's worst 32 Ford two-door sedan, but it was cool, and the dog slept in it, and the kids loved it, and we went and got ice cream in it.
The family and go to ice cream type of car.
Nah, it's kind of a one person tearing down a road and making a lot of noise, or going to a car store and putting it in a static spot. Yeah, I came in. I came in. I didn't win. Let's put it that way.
That year.
I got beat by a perfectly restored 32 full fendered car that was. I mean, I think they block sanded the washers on the fenders. It was incredibly finished, and hey, sometimes you just get beat by more hard work than the hard work you put in.
Was it at the Roadster show this year, the one that won that year?
No, it's a stock. I mean, it's a stock fender. It's a Restorod if there ever was one, and it's maroon. And I can't remember the owner's name, but I still got the brochure around here someplace. But no, I wasn't a very good participant. John West did the final assembly on the car in L.A., and he took it up there. We set it on the ground. I built a display. Then I went to my mom's house, which was 90 miles away. And I think I came back for the award ceremony. I thought that's all I needed to do, But when you enter a show, you gotta talk to people. You gotta explain stuff, And I didn't do that.
So what other projects have you
lessons
built
learned
for yourself? Did you build another car after that? Did you
for
take
myself.
a break before you got to the land speed car?
Yeah. Well, after that, after I sold that one, part of it turned into a kitchen, and part of it turned into a 32 two-door sedan that I bought from Lombardo, Chuck, and had Roy build a chassis because I wanted something safe that I could put the kids in, you know. And Roy built me a great little, just a, you know, no glamour, Roy Brizio chassis, a little Ford 302 with a 5-speed in it. And we just, I mean, it's the kind of car you could leave on any street corner and nobody bother at all with it, you know? And we had that for about, I don't know, till the kids were in high school, I think. So a good 10 years maybe. And then I got the bug to build something, but for some reason, it seemed like building a Bonneville car would be a really good idea. And I had the stock frame out of the 32. And so I'd always, ever since doing those Bonneville posters, I'd always been a gas roadster fan, whether it was the really fast ones or the really slow ones. And, you know, at Bonneville, you can make it as low as you want. And I've always been about as low as I can go, you know. And so we started building a Bonneville car, but that took, I whittled 3 off my first record, so it took 11 years instead of 14 years.
Yeah, that thing, it'd been in some magazines. It was kind of under construction when it was in Riders Journal, wasn't it? Or they built. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a bare metal shot. Yeah, we literally, we'd finished the frame, but the body panels weren't even, you know, they're basically clecoed into place. And it's always an honor to do anything with Riders Journal in my book, you know, the high water
make a
mark.
call with him. I owe him a call because he wants to make sure everything's all right before he does it. But he says he's going to come on our podcast, so that'll be a good one.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, that'd be a good idea. So I called up all those guys that I'd met years ago doing the posters, and I asked them a lot of questions. Jerry Kugel, Seth Hammond, a couple other guys had run. Jimmy Shine helped me a lot, and you know, just folks that you just normally in awe of. But man, you call them up and ask them a question, they'd you know, help you with anything you needed. You know,
yeah, Bonneville guys are some of the. I say in the car industry, custom and sled guys are, I think, some of the coolest because I grew up, you know, getting to meet Starbird and Winfield and Hines and all those guys. But in racing, there's nothing like Bonneville. She loves Bonneville. We have local friends that do Bonneville, and it's like you can't call yourself, even if you're not a car person, you need to go to Bonneville one time. We always say you need to go to Indy 500. We went to Daytona 500. You need to go to Kentucky Derby. There's just some American things that you need to do. You need to go watch a car go down the salt at Bonneville. It's one, you got to get out there when the sun comes up because you cannot explain it. It's spiritual and whatever. And it's like you're on the moon or something. But yeah, Bonneville is not. I've got to stand on the starting line between two nitro cars that you can't describe. But Bonneville is just like nothing. It's like one year we were there, and it was like, here's George Poteet's multi-million-dollar program. Then a couple stalls down, there's some guy living in a U-Haul truck that doesn't look like he's showered since last year, or and they'll all help each other. And Bonneville is just incredible.
Yeah, it's this whole thing about building. There's so much of the car enthusiast in the hobby world that's about all the things that happens after a car, auctions, car shows, selling them, buying them, and I just continue to have a huge admiration for anybody that's willing to cut something up and try to make something better out of it, And out there's so much diversity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, guys are running mini trucks and mini bikes, and 1980 Jaguar sedan with a Buick inline 6-cylinder. So it's a great place to go. And you're right, you can't find another substitute
first
for
started
it.
building
That's
that
the
car,
only thing that's
wasn't it
like
going to
that.
have a V6 in it? Now it's got a V8 motor in it. Okay.
We still have the V6, and it's owned by a really good friend of mine,
Oh yeah,
American Speed
what's his
Shop
name?
in York, Pennsylvania, Tony Napoli.
Yeah, I've been for 20 years.
Tony
I've been
Napoli,
a SEMA new product
and
judge. And he for quite a lot, like for almost
oh
all
yeah,
those except for the last couple of years, he was also a new product judge. So that's how I got to meet Tony. Mm-hmm.
yeah. No, he's a great guy. And in fact, I was drawing the Bonneville car at a SEMA board meeting on a little piece of paper. I was paying attention, but I was drawing too. And he goes, "What's that?" I said, "Oh, we're building a Bonneville car." He goes, "Yeah, what are you going to put in it?" I said, I don't know. We haven't figured that part out. I'm just worried about what it looks like." And he goes, "Well, I got this motor." But yeah, we're going to run the V6. Bonneville's the long game, excuse the pun, but it's, we decided if we're going to learn how to work as a team, we should do that before we take somebody else's motor and grenade it. And as it was, first motor we grenaded was last year, and it was mine.
Yeah, Bonneville, it's not like
anyway.
Like if you're a drag racer, I'm going to race the
you want to
U.S.
learn
Nationals. You can go to a drag strip and test and tune before. It's really hard to do that with a Bonneville car.
Yeah. And we haven't really done any of the pavement, I don't know what the mile courses that are run, but we got some knowledge, and we're not going to run this year because I got some family, luckily birthdays and reunions and things like that happen at the same time. So we're going to take a bye this year, but in fact, we just got a trailer. We've been borrowing trailers from people, and we got a trailer that's all ours. So we're getting ready to have another go at it. You haven't
ran it that many years at Bonneville, have you?
We've run 4 events and 1 World Finals and 3 Bonnevilles. Well, this past year, I said, I only want to get to 200 so we can figure out how much horsepower it takes to 200, because we want to build a motor that fits into a category where the record's just over 200. It went 199 and it burned up number 8 cylinders. So that's as fast as it's gone.
I sleep with the rule book from Bonneville really close to my bed. They were like, "Oh, I want to build this," and I look at it, and hopefully we got some friends that might let us do like some licensing runs someday. But if I told her tomorrow, I was like, "Hey, I got this vehicle, and eventually it's going to be a Bonneville car," she'd probably be okay with that. In my mind, I'd build a truck. Say what?
Well, you can make a Bonneville car.
Yeah.
I said you can make a Bonneville car out of literally anything. Including that that your uncle owned.
I have a buddy that he did have a Dodge Dakota with a turbo LS, but he balled it up at El Mirage last May. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So he doesn't have a Dakota anymore.
Well, the Jessel gang ended up with a bunch of Dodge NASCAR motors. I think they were one of the NASCAR motor program builders, and they started putting them in those big Ram pickups. And man, they were knocking it out on the record books. I think they're still
right. Were you wanting to do the V6?
That's cool.
Just because maybe that record in that Roadster class might be a little soft-ish, or it was just because this guy wants to build us a V6, so we're going to do that?
No, in fact.
Yeah.
No, I wanted to do it because it was Tony's motor, and Tony's just a really bitchin' dude. Tony said when he was 18 and he graduated high school, his dad said, "Well, now what are you going to do?" and he was literally holding a Carcraft magazine with an ad in the back of it that says "Run your own speed shop," and that's what he told his dad.
Yeah,
And that's the speed shop that he runs today. And he's just really cool. And so I want to we will run the V6.
Yeah.
I just don't want to run it while we're learning how to run.
Okay.
Yeah, it's got small blocks in it right now.
Because you debuted that kind of in public at the Roadster show, right? Before it actually made it to the Salt. And I was there because you were low. Yeah. Your display was on
once we got the
Dan Webb wing of the building that is always on that end towards the award stage. And I kept my distance because I'd seen that there was enough people around that you guys were struggling to get it up on the display that you had.
Oh, yeah.
Because like the ramp boards weren't long, because the thing is like really, really low. And I was like, okay, I don't need to be here right now. I got out of there. But yeah, that was a fun time for you guys trying to get it up on that display.
Yeah, well, we had this idea, or I had this idea, because we use this stuff at work called Gator board, and it's like an inch thick, and it's a 4x8 sheet, and it's like perfect, and it looks like a layer of salt. And I thought, okay, we'll just lift this car up, and then we'll cut these boards so that we slide them in around the wheels, and it looks like it's floating. Well, talking about it and doing it are two different things. So, but yeah. Chip came through, lent me the railing around the outside. And so, yeah, we had a display in record time. Other than
And so after you left Rivian, are you kind of like retired now, or are you doing small jobs for people?
No, we got two kids. We got two kids in college. And while I was telling RJ that he needed to get this guy who was an ex-Chrysler guy, I got approached by a friend who said, I'm doing some headhunting. There's a company you should go to work for. And you got to remember, Rivian at that time was like 120 people. They were serving dinner every night because we were doing pretty much 12 to 16-hour days, pretty much 6 days. And I turned 60. So, I wasn't getting any car projects done. And I knew they were headed for California. I knew that they'd have to move there at some time. And I thought, man, I'm not moving households at 60 years old, to California. And then to work for only 5 years, So my buddy calls me up and says, there's a company that's, a big supplier. It's called Magna. And they're like the number 3 or 4 largest part supplier in the world. And he said, they got a department and, they need a design person. I said, well, they don't build cars here in the U.S. They just build parts. And he goes, yeah, but they do a lot of innovation and stuff like that. And he says, how cars go together, So I thought, okay, well, and I knew he was getting paid to find people. So I said, yeah, I'll go do the interview. And I met this guy. His name's Graham Burrow. And Graham was just a really cool guy, just real intense. He had a Aston Martin and a Lamborghini, and he was a car guy, and and I thought, this will be fun. And so it was a 9-to-5 job. We worked maybe 2 Saturdays a year, and it was 2 miles from my house, So, and it made my, rightfully so, stopping working and going into an agreement where you'd be like, on retainer for 2 years, with a startup company, you kind of think, well, that's not what they need. And that's probably not what's going to last. So, so I took the job at Magna, and it was fun because you got to meet all the people that knew exactly how to make something. They knew the material sciences, knew the construction technique. They do really complex subsystems like whole lift gates and stuff. And and I got the Bonneville car finished, so everything was good. So yeah, I stopped working, or I retired from them. Now that I'm well into that section, last year. So I've just been hanging out with Bob Larrabee, working on some books,
we had Bob on
helping
the
Steve
podcast
Coonan,
about a month and a half ago. It took us
doing a
while
few
to
hot
get
rods.
down. We had him on for over 2 hours. He got to telling stories, and I've known Bob since I was forever, but I'm one of those guys.
Man,
Bob never remembers when I walk up to him. And then, but I buy books. I've bought, Robert Williams art from him. I always go see him at the SEMA show or any show or the Roadster show. And I bought his new book at the Roadster show and had him sign it. And I walk up to him, and he was just on our podcast like the week or two before Roadster show. And I go, "Are you going to remember me now?" And he goes, "Well, you look familiar." I was like, "You were just on my podcast." A 93-year-old guy doesn't understand what a podcast is. It took us 3 different people to get him, like, okay, we can send this email to here, because he doesn't have a cell phone, I don't think. And, but yeah, it was great. He got to telling stories.
He does.
Yeah.
He doesn't use it like a normal person, So, but Bob's incredible. I mean, when you think, one of the things that blew me away is he had all the receipts from the royalties on the zingers. And you could basically figure out which zinger sold more than the other zingers, And I mean, he, if you look at all the things he was involved with and all the people he was involved with over his career.
For indoor shows of bringing in the celebrities and the wrestlers, and that's just expected now, but he was like the first guy to do all that.
Oh, yeah. He wrote the book on that. So we did 2 books together. The first one, we probably did, we used his assets, but and a lot of his interactions and stuff like that. But we wrote it and I set it and laid it out. With the one you just bought at the Roadster show at Pomona, I set it, and one of the advantages that if you go to an art director or somebody and you send them a bunch of car pictures, they don't know what the cars are. They're not subject matter experts. So, like with Bob's books, I went through 4,000 pictures to get down to the 800 pictures that we used.
It's a really good book. I'm a print nerd. But that's one thing that me and my buddy Zane share. We share trade magazines and collection, and I got this one, the Boyd book with you standing beside the Illumacoop, and it's even signed by Boyd.
Thacker,
I have
Tony Thacker
a crazy
shot that
amount
image.
of books and a whole bunch of signed books too. In my wife calls me a nerd, but yeah, I'm a huge print collector. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that qualifies as a nerd.
That's why we're doing the podcast too, because I'm a history nerd of everything. So.
Well, I think Bob has like 300 or 400 photo albums, and all the stuff from all those events over all those years.
And he has his
just
own
some
section
really
at
cool
the
stuff.
Museum of American Speed up in Lincoln, Nebraska. And we've not been there yet. We're going there this year because now from here on out, the Starbird National.
Oh, hey. The motors.
I was just talking to somebody the other day, and I was like, "How have you not been there?" Like, well, they've been trying to get me to come up there and do a speaking thing at one of their cruise-ins, but from here on out, we're doing the Starbird National Rod and Custom Car Hall of Fame inductions up there since they bought all of Daryl's museum and moved it up there. So Daryl put me and basically Carrie on the board so we can do all the hard work.
That's a cool thing.
For the new inductions. So you're
cool. Well, that's one of my I have that plaque in my shop, so that's one of the nice things that's happened as a result of all these years of activity is being in Daryl's Hall of Fame.
Donna passed, and she used to run all that.
Hell of an honor.
We have been able to find a local place we deal with to do the exact same red plaques, and they took a few years break when Donna passed, and then last year a year ago, February was our first new induction. So there was a few years I didn't do anything. So now we're back and running with inductions again. So you're pretty much, are you still doing any side work for anybody? If somebody calls and wants a car designed, are you open for that, or are you just kind of over that?
Oh, yeah. No, I listen. One of the things I learned after Cadzilla is, they don't always come along like that. And in fact, the next car that came along like that was a complete opposite disaster, but it's just great to work with people on what they're doing. I tend not to, I'm not looking for billable hours. I'm more looking for connection with something to do. I like to develop a reason that we're doing something. With Billy, there was his music and his personality and all these other aspects that you could just, you could mine for sort of, inspiration. And a lot of times folks will come to you and say, "Oh, I just want to do the coolest thing going." And it's like, well, if you're really going to have it in your life, because it isn't just what you build, it's what happens to what you build. That's why programs like your own, events like, what the Speedway Museum does, and car shows and stuff, they all build that legacy of the car, and so yeah, I'm working on a Zephyr for a guy. Guy's got to be 6'4". This Zephyr is like the biggest roadster I've ever worked with, but it's in a metal shop owned by a friend of mine. We did a couple of restoration projects over the years. A 250 Ferrari, Zagato body car, where we did a lot of work to it. And so, yeah, it's great fun when you get to do a hot rod project. There's nothing wrong with that. Oh, hey, 40 Mercury's all-time killer, man. Matranga car, are you kidding?
I've been gathering parts for my.
That's like holy grail.
Traditional-ish 40 Mercury. That's my someday project that I still have.
Okay, how far are you going to go with the top? Because these days that sort of intersection between the roof and the tulip panel or the deck lid, the amount of definition that has, whether it's a subtle hollow or whether it's a hard break, that kind of separates those cars into. But yeah, they're like pre-custom, so you got to really work hard and really work subtle to get it to be
car chronicle. Rick was, Photoshop stuff, and he's played with the roof lengths on exactly what you said. I call it the catwalk, the back, stretching the roof and leaving the roof, and it changes so much just moving that top just a little bit.
Yeah. Well, also the rake of the car. One of the things, heard a great story years ago about somebody chopping a 32 Ford, and they had deep pockets. They had a whole crew working on it. So they sent these guys out and they measured a whole bunch of 32 Fords, and they came to the mathematical sort of optimum combination. They chopped it and they didn't like it, And a friend of mine was brought in because he'd been involved in some of these cars, and it was sitting up on his surface plate. And he said, "Well, is that how you decided it's wrong? Looking at it up there in the air on the surface plate, and it was, it wasn't the normal low surface plate. It was one that was more like a couple feet off the ground." And he said, "You need to get it on its wheels, on the ground, on the ride height, And that was literally the first thing I ever did with what Craig Neff had done with Cadzilla, because they had it sitting on jack stands, and it wasn't at the right height. It didn't have the right wheels, so we mocked up the front wheel covers, and we took some blocks of wood and moved it around. But chopping the top, there's a million ways. There's a million ways to have it go wrong, and You got to really focus on the proportions, a proportion of how big the window openings are. You know, some of those guys used to pull the windshield up into the header because as you drop that roof down, their shoulders get really big. And we actually recurved the shoulders and the roof on Cadzilla. So it isn't a stock Cadillac upper roof, you know.
Okay.
So, yeah. Hey, give me a call.
So, yeah. And
you got
if
my
anybody
phone number,
tries to get a hold of him on Instagram, he does not. And look, I finally called him the other day, and I was like, "Hey, I've been trying to get a hold of you. I sent a message on Instagram. You never check them." He goes, "No, should I?" I was like, "Well, if you don't want to, I mean, a lot of people don't, but yeah." So, yeah. So now you are doing.
Well, I look at the pictures of everybody else.
I don't have
I'm too busy doing
anymore.
that.
I got it hacked, but I like Instagram. She's more of a Facebook person, but yeah, I'm a visual person, so that's why I like all the pictures on. Yeah, I like to do the search page, you know, or the.
Me too.
Like, you know, if you start looking at car stuff and more car stuff comes up, and you'll see the most amazing metalwork going on in somebody's shop that you may have never heard of. It's like, oh my God, what is this guy doing? I mean, he may be building rebodying a Ferrari or building a hot rod. And it's like, there's a lot of talent out there. I mean, we get spoiled going to the shows and seeing the rad rides and the this and the that. But there's a lot of stuff being built out there. People that are getting ready to make their mark, as you say, and a lot of, you know, crazy metal craftsmanship. It's very crazy. So now you're building. This is what I think is cool. You know, you've designed all these crazy cars, and you know the Illumacoop with a rear engine, all space age looking car. And let's talk about the truck you're working on now in your garage.
Well, part of it is what happened to you at a certain point in your life when, you know, you realized you're like 15 or so, 14 or so, and it's like, hey, man, I'm not that far away from getting something. Maybe I'll be looking at this stuff a little closer. And what was going on, that would have been about 68. Yeah, I'd have been 11 in 68. But 68, 69, 70, there were a bunch of little Model A pickups in the Bay Area. And Greg Sharp tells me that the reason there's those sort of numerous Model A pickups up there is that the ranches and the farms up there tend to be a more modest physical size. So they tend to be like mom and pop things, you know, orchard here or something like that. Not like out in the valley where everything's massive, you know. And so these guys would buy these little Model A pickups and they just never throw them away. You know, you just keep them. So Cardoza was one. Cardoza was one of the first guys to put a Jag rear end under a hot rod, and it was a Model A pickup, and had a Weber carburetors on it. And I just remember going to the Oakland Roadster Show in 1968 and seeing these things at 11 years old and just thinking, wow, that's just like the coolest thing in the world. So I ended up with a spare set of body parts out of the Bonneville car because we ended up making things out of, and I ended up with an extra cowl. And I started to look at pickups and I thought, God, I could almost build a pickup. And so there was this guy, he passed away not too long ago. His name's Paul Beck. And Paul had 6 barns of car parts, all old Ford and some late model GM powertrains. But anyway, he wanted some parts that I'd taken out of my 32 that were just laying in the garage. So I swapped them for some more Model A parts. And I just wanted to build something I could run around in. And now it's getting a little bit nicer than I thought it was going to be. But I just want something that's low with mag wheels and a nasty little motor, a Muncie 4-speed, and a quick change.
You're not the shortest guy. I'm 6'3". I love Model A pickup trucks, but I'm going to look like Herman Munster sitting in a Model A pickup truck.
They don't love you. Well, with the Never Leave Well Enough Alone, Greg Sharp was the first one to say, "Man, you got to stretch that cab." He says, "You can't live with that thing." And so what I did is my wife has a little like Subaru Crosstrek or whatever it is, and I thought, okay, I'm going to set up the seating position in this car. I measured it all out, and I took those dimensions, and I'm stretching the back of the cab, not the quarter panel, not the sheet metal on the outside, but the back of the cab into the bed, and hopefully I'll be able to live with it.
And what's the power
So
plant in that
that's
thing?
my plan. Grew up like an old Ford cars, but Chevrolet motors. So it's basically a copy of a 1968 Z28 302. So the first 302s were 2-bolt main blocks, not the 4-bolt main blocks. And it's basically a 283 crank and a 327 block. And the intake system's out of Texas. The heads are from here in Michigan. The cranks from eBay, and the blocks from California. So we got pieces from all over the country, just kind of
small block
going
stuff.
left and right.
I'm building an OBS truck, and I'm keeping a small block in it. And speaking of weird motors, I got some from Johnny Robinson. I got some Fat Jack Robinson ball milled anodized stuff from him that his dad used to sell in the 80s. And so I'm putting some of that stuff on there. But I was talking to Johnny the other day, and he was talking about Little John Batera stuff, and I passed up on a chance of a Hawk block. You know what the Hawk blocks are? And I guess Dennis Varney's Boyd Model A Amber winner has a Hawk block in it, which I didn't know. And the guy that had this Hawk block a few years ago, it was affordable, but he didn't have anything for it, and he didn't know what went in it. Well, I learned talking to Johnny that it might have been, cranks or, the bearings or something that you had to get, like race car parts. Huh?
340 move block. Yeah. Some of the Chrysler 340 rod bearings or crank. There's a lot of that, stuff that was used to sort of optimize the architecture of the Chevrolet.
He helped his dad put together a Hawk block for somebody's car, I forget. And he goes, it was basically small block Chevy stuff, but race car small block Chevy stuff that Little John was designing that motor to go to Indy or something, and then something changed. But I don't know how many Hawk blocks, but they're a cool looking motor. I'd love to have one for a Roadster.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm wishing one of these days I'd find some old, Donovan block or something like that. But a lot of those things ran hard and put away
Donovan
wet.
Block for sale.
So.
It's a pretty one, yeah.
Hey, he's got a really cool Bonneville car too.
That was a really good another great interview. But yeah, that's a pretty car he has. Yeah. Yeah. So, do you have another project in mind when you get this Model A truck done, or is that going to be your last hurrah to cruise around and go to ice cream in?
Oh no. I just don't want to admit it on something that might end up in the wrong hands. So no, there's a bunch of stuff I'd like to build. I still miss my 55 Buick. So
I came across that the other day. I'm sorting my magazine collection, and it was in custom rodder. It was what's his name? And I actually sent one of my young buddies. Yeah. He's got one coming in. He goes, "Has anybody ever done anything cool to one of them?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, look at the one Larry Erickson had." And he goes, "Oh yeah, we're not going to chop it and move the moldings." And who is it? I don't know how to say his last name.
Well, we actually just dropped the roof into the car.
Jim, is it?
Yeah, there's a guy.
Bailey did some of the work on that. Okay.
Jim Bailey did almost everything on the body, and all Jim did was you basically cut the car around the base of the windshield and the backlight. Mm-hmm. You drop it down, drop those surfaces down, and then you build a drain trough for it. So the back window is a stock piece of glass, and the windshield is a stock piece of glass, and you just don't roll the door windows up as far. it's pretty ingenious, and you can only do it really well with car with vertical side glass and and a wind wing. But and then we moved the wheel opening up. Mm-hmm. We moved the openings up on the body. We didn't channel it or section it,
Yeah.
And I like that car a lot.
Weird concept car I'm doing for myself, that the roof is a 59 Impala and I want to chop it just a little bit, and I'm looking like, am I going to chop it just enough so I can trim the glass, or am I going to sink it? I haven't quite figured that out yet. So,
well, the problem with doing anything with the glass is the parts themselves are so expensive. Glass is so expensive. So if you blow up two of them, you're into
got a really
grand more than you thought you were going to.
Travels and does a lot of stuff for the high end shops out in the middle of the country. Well, I guess he's been to the East Coast too, and but the same thing. He's like, oh, if we're going to do it, buy 2 windows. We might, and that's glasses. And I don't like. I've never, even when I worked in collision shops when I was in high school, I never liked glass work. So I was like, I'm just going to bring him in, and I'm going to go someplace else while he does the glass work. So. Yeah, because even so, when I had my TV show, we did a Hudson. It was actually from just north of Detroit. We chopped the Hudson on the TV show, and he came in, and the Hudson it was a 50 Hudson, had this curved glass, but it was 2-piece curves. And he cuts the one over in the prep station, and they were filming it, and they're like, okay, Tim, you're going to come over, and we're going to get your reaction of him cutting this other piece of glass. And I go, no. I told my producer, I go, you don't want me within 30 feet of him cutting a piece of glass. I'm bad mojo for glass cutting. Oh, no, we're good. Sure, I'm walking, and I'm standing there watching, and we're filming it. Sure enough, that piece of glass cracked, that second piece, because I was standing too close. I wasn't touching it. But, yeah, I'm bad luck around glass.
Oh, well. Well, it's great to hear you're building something else, because I think you're 65. Is 65, right? The Chevelle?
Thanks. Yeah, I remember you gave me a compliment.
One of my
I think
favorite
it was a Triple Crown the first year I had it sitting in a booth, and I just thought you were messing with me. That getting a compliment on a hot rod that I built from Larry Erickson was it was pretty good day.
No.
Yeah. Thanks.
That was a good looking car. No, I'll always want to be building something, so or at least working with somebody that's building something. So I'm no reason to slow down at all. You got more time now.
Oh, I do not.
I actually made a set of headers.
I built a tube frame chassis before. I don't know. I don't enjoy headers. Headers are not. They're a separate art in themselves. Building a good set of headers, they really are.
They're not. Yeah, let's put it this way. It took me 3 to get 2 that were even decent, and those I'm sure would qualify as most of the shops that can do it.
We usually have questions. He's not going to say what he wants to build because we understand that somebody might steal an idea. Mm-hmm. You have an event that you'd like to go to. A lot of people, we ask what event you'd like to go to. Some people say the Rock that they haven't been to. You've been to the Rock. I sometime would like to go to the England event that you talked about, Goodwood. You've been pretty lucky to get to go to a lot of cool events and probably concours events. Is there some kind of an event that you have never been to that you would love to go to yet on your bucket list?
I've never been to either of the big swap meets like Hershey or what's the other one that happens Carlisle, So probably Hershey or something like that. Harrah's car collection was still in place when we were kids, and my dad took us up there a couple times. But anytime I went to Oshkosh for the first time a few years ago, and that was really impressive. But the events and there's a lot more than just a Rock. I mean, that's the one that comes to mind because we did it last October. But I really like that scale of event where you feel like you can go around and talk to people, and it's like you've got through everything and you felt like you really did it. You go someplace with 2,500 cars and inevitably somebody tells you about the one that you didn't see.
So
that you hadn't seen that.
I recommend. Me and Zane want to do this, but we don't have the pockets like the guys that used to do this. They used to go to, I think it was Hershey. It wasn't Hershey. Carlisle. Because Hershey's more older cars, right? And Carlisle is more newer cars, muscle car stuff. So they went to Hershey.
Yeah.
So
Carlisle's got a lot.
A custom Buick years ago for Paul Hansen. He had a Steve Mole built amber winning car. He was from NorCal. We built another 32 for his son. It was him. I don't know who all, but I know John Mumford was involved. So it's that type of guys that had good cars, good collections, well-off guys, to put it nicely. They'd fly in, and they had all these rules. So, like, me and Carrie was a partner. So this year, I buy the car. Next year, she buys the car. But they couldn't be anything newer than 1954, and it couldn't have, like, it's been LS swapped. It still had to be 54 older, original-ish car. And then they had all these rules. They all drove together. There was, like, 6 pairs of guys. So, like, a dozen people that went and did this. And they did it a few years in a row. Like, Paul's since passed away, and he gave his 54 Chrysler Hemi car to his son for his wedding that he bought and drove across country like that. So they all fly in and they buy something, and they said, if you buy a lemon and you can't keep it on the road, get it fixed. Or if you tap out and didn't buy a car, you had to put like $5,000 in the pot, and then the rest of the guys that are still driving across country could use that for dinners or gas expenses or whatever. And the stories that he would tell was just hilarious. He goes, the one year, John Mumford, day one, comes out for breakfast. He goes, I bought a piece of crap. Here's my $5,000. I got a plane coming to get me. He said he tapped out, but that would be a fun trip, because they did it all the way from Pennsylvania all the way back out to California. That would be an experience. That really would.
A lot of guys, including one of the ones that helped on the Bonneville car, back in the 70s and 80s, early 80s, they'd fly to LA and go to some, like the March meet or something, and buy some clunker and then drive it home. And he says that's some of their most fond memories, because I really think it's that sort of inconvenience and unintended thing and something like that really, leaves a lasting memory and gives you things you can really enjoy. And I just think, treating cars on a little bit more of a light approach sometimes goes a long way towards
Roadkill was popular,
making
the TV
it fun,
program and everything, and YouTube for all those years. And I got a good buddy. I don't know if you know JF Lanier from Canada. He's won the Riddler. He's competed for the Riddler before, won a bunch of stuff in the industry. Well, he bought a vehicle kind of sight unseen, just by pictures, in upstate New York, and he's driving it to Lake Havasu. And he stopped here at me and a buddy's shop last week, because it's a 58 Chevy ramp truck with a 502 Ramjet, original brakes, and some hydro boosts, a lot of stuff that didn't jive. And last night they were 8 hours from Lake Havasu, and we put plugs in it, fixed some wiring, fixed the shifter, changed the oil, got it to run better. But that's a tough vehicle, because if you break down, you can't just put a ramp truck on a truck and trailer very easily. So he's like, man, we're committed. Yeah. And luckily, they have a YouTube channel, so they've been filming it, so they're getting a lot of footage. And he goes, man, something happens to this thing. He says about every 2 to 4 hours, something happens. So, yeah, I'm over that. I don't think I do a little car, but yeah, something that you could get saved by a buddy with an open car trailer pretty handily. But yeah.
Get a plateau fix. But no, that when you were kids, you did all kinds of stuff. Like when you had those 11 cars that laying around, you'd mix, match this thing, and swap this thing, and it was just a great time because the buy-in was low, and a lot of flexibility.
We talk about that, the future of hot rodding with older cars. It's tough because the entry level, I mean, my driver car, I mean, I always had 55 Chevys and project cars and the Pro Street car. But like my driver car I actually bought was my third car when I was 14 that I drove in high school and ended up being a show car was a 64 Chevelle, 283 4-speed running, bucket seat console car for $3,200. And you can't find that stuff now. That $3,200 car in today's world might be 12 grand, and it's hard unless you're a family hot rodder with an uncle or a dad or somebody like that, or a grandpa that'll help you get into something or give you an old Model A or something like that. That's the problem of getting these young kids into hot rods, is because the starting project's such deep pockets.
Well, hopefully the used car market won't, dry up completely, and people find a connection to the stuff that's newer. A friend of mine, his son's was doing a Fiero, so, and I found an article on Speed Hunters about this guy in Norway that did one. It was a really cool looking car, so stuff's out there. You just gotta have some imagination, and hopefully you got a network of friends or people that
so you've
been wherewithal that'll give you a hand.
Iconic cars in hot rodding and custom car industry. As a designer, where do you see it going now? Like you talked, a lot of hot rod shops you go to, they're building Pro Tour cars and the modern suspensions. Where do you see that the industry is going to be going in 10 or 15 years?
Well, the high end, which keeps getting higher, and an example of that is, are you familiar with these Singer Porsches? So basically, they're backdating a product that no longer looked like the look they wanted, and they're selling it, $750 and up, and the guys doing those, which are the guys that are painting them, are hot rod guys. Mixed Jenkins in his shop in Southern California. They just have a whole crew just working prepping those cars. Right? So I think on the high end, there's more and more stuff getting replicated and built up that either there's only a few of them and now people want more, So I don't think that end will ever stop. And tools are getting easier. Printers are getting more accessible. Water jets, mills, things like that. I think for the person who's looking at buying their first car and is at the other end of that financial scale, the access to YouTube and being able to fix things that you can't find somebody else to fix, that's going to be the grace there, and you see lots of guys engine swapping very complex engine systems with complex electronics, and they still figure out how to do it, So I think the bottom end of that, the next 55 Chevy for the rest of the world may be a 1980s Jeep Cherokee, I see this, and we tend to divide ourselves into these subsets. I'm not an off-road guy. I'm a pre-48 hot rod guy or something like that. But in total, SEMA isn't continuing to grow because of vapor. It's continuing to grow because people are putting money into cars and building stuff, So the information system will keep that going. Kind of worried about,
go ahead.
What's that? Oh, just worried about legislation coming in that will not allow that to happen. So this Jay Leno law in California, which is a good thing, which allows you to keep an older car in an older state and keep it on the road. Those things will succeed.
Yeah.
We're going to get all our enthusiasm behind them,
I don't know what I was going to say, but so one thing, for a few years, and you can say I don't want to talk about it, you allegedly have been part of the judging staff at America's Most Beautiful Roadster.
Well, I'm happy to talk about it.
Judge shows at the Tulsa show and a few other things, and it's cool to be a part of it, but then sometimes it's like, It's not fun. And you know somebody's going to get mad and get their feelings hurt. And like this year, it was kind of a car for fabrication and stuff. But then there was a lot of great cars too that were still what I call hot rod 32s. Like did I say his name right? The Laranzini car that was started by Peter Forrest. I mean,
Lorenzini.
That and the Model A pickup truck. If I was going to pick two that I could just take off the showroom floor, off the show floor, and put in my garage, those would have been the two that I probably would have taken. The hot rod style, you know, it was the Lorenzini car. How do you say it?
Yeah,
Lorenzini. The VZ
Lorenzini
finished. I mean
I think that's how it's pronounced.
Yeah, that was.
It was the only
started by Pete before Lime Fire. So it had Lime Fire pipes. It had the chute. I mean, it's just hot roddy as hot rod can be. And then on the other token, I mean, all great cars. You know, I didn't get up and judge and nitpick, you know, paint and gaps and all that stuff. But that totally hand-built rad ride car is like if Ford would have built a new 36 Ford Roadster. What's your take on the show stuff being like that and being a part of the judging staff?
Well, first of all, I'm really honored they asked me to begin with, and I hope it'll continue. I think the way they judge is more in the spirit of how you ought to judge a hot rod show. You know, the shows that get judged purely on a point system where it's, you know, a plated part gets more points than a painted part, and a painted part gets more points than a CAD plated part. You know,
10 or 12 years ago, they kind of changed the judging. That's when they pull in and you look how the guy sits in or lady, the person sits in the car and how it sounds and all that stuff.
And really what they were opening it up to was less of the sort of microscopic approach and more of the sort of a holistic or a whole car approach. It's interesting that I've been doing this for 4 or 5 years. This year was the longest debate on what should win. And even though the crowd, I think the public crowd just looked at you know, the 36 and just went, well, that's it. You know, that's it. But the Lorenzini car and a couple of the other cars had an enormous energy as far as what hot rodding has always established itself on, you know, which is, you know, a very polarizing type of car, you know. And in the case of the Lorenzini car, it was about as hot rod as you could get, you know. And in the case of the pickup, it was about a perfect little pickup with this incredible little motor in it, and, you know, like the banger to end all bangers. So I actually thought this year's debate on what was going to win was in more of the spirit of what the trophy ought to be about, which is, you know, what's the most beautiful roadster. And if it was called what was the most hot rod roadster, then there's no question the Lorenzini car would have won it, right? But that award is called America's Most Beautiful Roadster. So it walks that line between the custom elements and the hot rod elements. And when you looked at what the 36 had, it just balanced out more. Wow. But it was the longest debate was this year.
I even loved that little T that was the yellow with the stripes that was recreated from a 80s rod action. That thing was that was killer too, man. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I would say the thing that pushed it in the direction of the 36 was that everything was addressed. Every millimeter of that car. It was done with intention. And whenever that is a part of deciding what wins, then you run the risk of somebody who spends longer or more time beating a car that didn't spend as much time. My approach to this stuff is you don't work based on the backstory. You don't work based on whether a person did it on their own or whether 20 people did it. Because there are people that on their own, Don Thalen, Bob Bowder, Boyd, probably Roy, not probably, definitely Roy, and other folks, if they took the same amount of time that was in that 36, they could do the same. They could do the same thing. So, you set yourself up with a little bit of a quagmire, but I think the right car got picked, and I think they got a good process for deciding.
Everybody has something else they're looking at. I always remember an old magazine. It was maybe a Pete Miller cartoon or somebody like that, how people think of. You ask her what a hot rod is. She has a hot rodded Corvair with a motor in the front. What I say a hot rod is, what you say a hot rod is. And I remember that's why they have not just one judge. They have a team of judges to discuss it. And they've asked me to be on the Slonaker team. And I was like, I just want to go to the Roadster show and enjoy myself and not get in and nitpick and everything. But I remember this one cartoon. It was like the guy walked up to the guy at the shop and says, I want the most perfect Willys built. Can you build it? Yeah. And then they had, the little balloon, how they're thinking. And the one guy's thinking gasser, and the other guy's thinking pro street drag car hammered on the ground because, a Willys, that's how some people see it. The same thing was how a hot rod or a roadster should be. It's different. That's why it's fun to go to the show. It's not all blondes or all brunettes. There's a little bit of everything. So.
Well, I came in. Wes told me I came in second on the Grand National when I took my Roadster. Okay, and it had 14 years worth of work in it. And what I learned out of that exchange was sometimes you have to explain that work. Because we clay modeled the whole front end and cast molds, and Craig did aluminum and all that other stuff. And there's always going to be challenges in trying to judge the work of somebody else. But I would say that at the Grand National, you've got people judging who build cars at that level.
Yeah.
So the Bobby Alloways and the Pete Eastwoods and folks like that. Strength is really in those 7 people that get together to have that discussion. How articulate are they at advocating what they think needs to win, and how open-minded are they at looking at somebody else's idea of what should win? So, it takes a little bit of everything.
Well, you got anything? We've covered a lot of ground here.
You guys have been doing a good job talking.
You just kind of been sitting there the whole time. So,
I have.
So, anything else you want to throw in here at the end? Thank somebody or?
Well, a lot of people to thank because, this country seems to be fixated on the individual, but the truth is most good things come out of a group of people, and so I've always been fortunate to work with some of the best groups of people, and now it's judging and working with these guys on other projects. So I'd just say thanks to anybody that took the time to explain something and work through something.
So if people want to follow you, what is your Instagram page? What's your handle on there?
It's my I think it's L Erickson 32. I think.
And look at my phone. You have to be on an inner circle to get his cell phone number, because if you're going to reach out to him for work on Instagram, he will not even read the message. He's probably got 1,000 messages.
Now I'm going to read those messages. I didn't shoot. I never thought anything like that was going to show up. So, Yeah, it's L Erickson 32. So Lerickson 32. 32. 32. My dad's birthday. Anyway, yeah, we set up that Instagram page so that the guys that are, contributed into the Bonneville car, whether they're in, in York, Pennsylvania, or they're in California, we could stay up to speed. But over the years, I get to see things that I don't always get to, think one of my buddies can't see. So I try to put up shots of like Autorama and some of the events I'm at. I was at the Grand National, and we're judging the cars pulling in, and there's lots of hot roddy type of cars and things like that. And I'm thinking, boy, this is gonna be tough to separate, what from what. And I walk outside and I'm thinking, okay, what's a beautiful car? And Doug Jurger's driving down in between the buildings with that light putty green 33 two-door sedan, and out in the sunshine with those wheels and stuff. And man, I just looked at that. And I thought,
that was you that posted it, wasn't
beautiful.
it? A picture of that, and you go, "This is my pick for America's most beautiful sedan," or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's cut the roof off it. Anyway, but yeah, hey, we should have problems like this. This is great.
Well, we want to thank Larry Erickson for being a guest on the Strange Motion Way podcast. And it's an honor. I want to say thank you from the first time I ever walked up, and she says I bother everybody. I don't just talk to everybody, but you've always been cordial. You never had an ego. We're all just car people. And anybody that ever has met Mr. Erickson always says the same thing. He's the nicest guy you ever want to talk to. And so I just want to thank you for being an influence on the whole automotive industry in a positive way. And thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you very much. It means a lot, especially for the two of you who've worked with so many other people and talked to them over the years, because it's tough putting your creativity out there online, as you both know, and then and then have people sort of, I don't know if the word's pass judgment, but it's at least to look at it and think about it, because that's what our hobby's about, So anyway, well, thanks for the invitation, and
thank you.
Look forward to seeing you at a car show sometime.
Hey, welders, ready to upgrade your gear and save some serious dough in the process? The Miller Build with Blue Savings and Rebate Program has you covered. Find amazing deals and cashback rebates on a wide range of Miller products, from welders to plasma cutters and everything in between, all backed by our 3-year warranty. Don't let this opportunity pass you by. Take advantage of the Miller Build with Blue program now. Visit us online or stop by your nearest Miller distributor today to start saving.